It's over. For the first time in modern American history, a sitting president is facing the forced dismantling of his own empire. No delays. No shields. No precedent in over 50 years. The order has been signed. Assets marked. Lines crossed. How did a system designed to protect power become the weapon that turned on it? Stay with us, because what happens next rewrites the rules forever. The first thing you would notice was the sound. Not shouting. Not arguments. Just the steady noise of a printer inside a court administration office. Paper moved through the machine slowly. Line by line. A clerk tore off the page. Tape was pulled sharp. Finaux. Shoes crossed the marble floor. Every movement was calm, controlled, professional. On a metal table lay a cream-colored envelope. Thick paper, no decoration. One red stamp in the center, Orner. No one spoke loudly, because no one needed to. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with new paper filled the room. This was not routine. This was not paperwork being processed. This was the moment something broke. I have followed American politics for decades. I have watched scandals explode, presidents fall, markets crash, and courts hesitate. And I want to say this clearly even for me. This moment was shocking, because what sat on that table was not just a legal document. It was the end of delay. Then one sentence was read aloud. Only one. Effective immediately. Those words matter. In court language. They mean there is no more waiting. No more protection. No more time to maneuver. When a judge uses those words, the system moves forward, whether you are ready or not. This only happens when the financial shield disappears. The stay of enforcement, the barrier that kept Trump's assets safe while appeals dragged on, was gone. And that shield only falls when the money behind it collapses. Now cut to New York. Saturday morning. Winter sunlight struck the glass of 40 Wall Street. Bright and unforgiving. The street was unusually quiet. Flags snapped in the wind. A government vehicle stopped at the curb. No siren. No announcement. Just flashing lights reflected in the building's windows. That silence was the warning. This was the ignition point. For years, Donald Trump had treated accusations with open contempt. Fraud claims were a joke. Courts were rigged. Prosecutors were mocked. Insulted. Dismissed. He spoke as if none of it mattered. As if consequences were something that happened to other people. I've watched him sneer at filings, wave off evidence, reduce serious allegations to punchlines. He behaved as though the system itself would lose patience before he did. But systems do not get tired. They wait, and now the question had changed. It was no longer what could happen. It was what happens next. If a state court can order the seizure of assets, who stops the sheriff when that order leads toward a building connected to the sitting president of the United States? Where does lawful enforcement end, and where does a constitutional crisis begin? What you are about to hear is not an attack. It is not speculation. It is a reconstruction based on legal procedure, financial evidence, and documented mechanisms of how quiet paperwork turned into a brutal turning point. And I will say this plainly, I have never seen anything like this. We are now in territory with no map. To understand how this crisis exploded, we need to understand the people moving the levers behind it. Because this was not chaos. It was coordination. At the center, of course, was Donald Trump. For decades, Trump operated with what many insiders privately called the Teflon mindset. Accusations slid off. Investigations faded. Deadlines bent. He learned correctly, for a very long time, that if he mocked long enough, delayed long enough, attacked loudly enough, the system would eventually lose interest. To Trump, wealth was not just money. It was identity. His buildings were not assets. They were proof. Proof of dominance. Proof of survival. Proof that rules apply to others. That morning, he adjusted his long red tie too tight around the neck. His hand rested on the edge of a wooden desk. Fingers pressing harder than necessary. On the television behind him, one word repeated every few minutes: seizure. He scoffed at it. I've seen that look before. The dismissive half smile. The silent message. This is nothing. This is noise. I've beaten worse. But this time, the machine kept moving. Behind the scenes sat a New York Supreme Court judge, no name needed. What mattered was temperament, and patience had run out. The decision not to grant more time was not political theater. It was arithmetic. Liquidity risk, global instability, a defendant who could not prove cash. Delay was no longer neutral. Delay became dangerous. Then there was Letitia James. Her strategy was brutally simple. She did not want golf courses buried in lawsuits. She wanted cash flow. She wanted assets that could be controlled, redirected, and converted. Buildings with tenants, accounts with balances, symbols with leverage. This was not revenge. This was enforcement. The Sheriff's Office of New York City played its role with mechanical clarity. Their position was not ideological. It was procedural. We have an order. That was it. Across the invisible line stood the Secret Service. Their logic came from a different universe. National security. Protected perimeters. Controlled access. They weren't debating guilt or innocence. They were calculating risk. 2 forces, 2 mandates. 1 doorway. Inside the White House. Phones did not stop ringing. The White House counsel's office was not arguing whether the judgment was fair. That question was already dead. They were arguing consequences. Optics. Precedent. What happens if enforcement meets resistance? What happens if it doesn't? At judicial, far from Washington and New York, a risk committee met inside a bond insurer's network. I have reviewed how these meetings work. Short agenda. No emotion. 1 email followed shortly after. Subject line: risk mitigation event. That was the moment the financial oxygen disappeared. Now the board was set. 4 targets. No confusion. 40 Wall Street. Complicated leasehold. Symbolic. Liquid. Trump Tower commercial floors. Revenue. Visibility. Control. 7 Springs. Clean seizure. History attached. Bank accounts. Immediate paralysis within 24 hours. I need to be honest here. Even after decades watching power collide with law, this was difficult for me to absorb. This was no longer a lawsuit. This was a valve being opened. And once opened, there is no gentle way to close it again. The collapse did not begin in a courtroom. It began thousands of miles away. Tokyo. Late night. Japan's bond market cracked without warning. Liquidity vanished in hours. Trillions of dollars that had quietly supported the global financial system began rushing for the exits. What looked stable on Friday evening became radioactive by dawn. This was not politics. This was mathematics. And when mathematics breaks, it breaks fast. Inside the financial plumbing that few voters ever see, an emergency meeting was called. Reinsurance firms, risk committees, compliance officers staring at balance sheets that no longer balanced. At judicial, the decision was made. The appeal bond backing Donald Trump's civil fraud judgment could no longer be carried. The risk was too high. The exposure too dangerous. In a collapsing market, guarantees turn into liabilities overnight. At the message reached New York. The bond is gone. 5 words. No emotion. No explanation needed. Minutes later, and a document arrived. A PDF attachment. 1 word stamped across the page in bold, black letters, withdrawn. This was the moment the system flipped. When the New York court received that notice, everything changed. Normally, a defendant might receive 30 days to replace a bond. Time to negotiate. Time to maneuver. Not this time. Because the world outside the courthouse was on fire. Markets were falling. Commercial real estate values were sliding by the hour. If the court waited, the assets could evaporate before enforcement even began. Delay was no longer neutral. Delay became reckless. The response was immediate and merciless. No extensions, no grace period. 24 hours. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere shifted. The smell of printer ink grew thick. Papers moved faster. An assistant dropped a paperclip. Small sounds suddenly felt enormous. The air conditioning hummed too loudly. Like a warning siren no one could turn off. I have watched courts hesitate before. I have watched judges blink under pressure. I did not see that here. Even for me. This was hard to absorb. I had never seen a financial shield collapse so completely. So suddenly, at NOAA 0 a.m., the order was signed. The stay of enforcement was lifted. With one signature, theory became action. The sheriff's office moved with precision. This was not a raid. This was a checklist. Properties identified. Accounts flagged. Notices prepared. The strategy was layered. First, the banks. Quiet. Clean. No cameras required. Money can be frozen without anyone opening a door. A senior advisor inside the White House whispered a warning that has echoed through many crises before. Don't create the footage they want. But reality does not wait for media strategy. By late morning, a sheriff approached the revolving doors on Fifth Avenue. Calm, professional. No raised voices, just an order in hand. Then the Secret Service stepped forward. 2 authorities, 2 mandates, 1 entrance. Weapons stayed holstered, but their presence was unmistakable. In moments like this, restraint does not calm the room. It tightens it. This was the breaking point. The instant state law touched the edge of federal power. The instant enforcement collided with protection. I have never seen this configuration before, not in decades of watching American crises unfold. This was no longer a legal dispute. This was a constitutional flashpoint. Unmapped territory. No precedent. And no one blinked. This is the moment most people misunderstand. They think seizure means locks and chains, police tape, chaos. That is not how this works. Under New York law specifically, CPLR Article 52, the court does not merely watch a failing asset. It replaces its owner. Quietly. Legally. Completely. The receiver is not a supervisor. The receiver is not an auditor. The receiver steps into the chair. I've seen this mechanism used before. Rarely. Carefully. And when it appears, it signals something final. The court has stopped asking. It has started acting. Once appointed, the receiver controls the engine room, rent collection, building operations, payroll, security contracts, management decisions. If selling the asset is necessary to satisfy the judgment, the receiver can do that too. Ownership becomes symbolic. Control becomes absolute. And the first move is always the same. The letters go out. At 40 Wall Street, envelopes arrive at law firms, financial companies, consultancies, every tenant. Thick paper, black type. The court seal pressed hard into the page. You can smell the adhesive when the envelope opens. One sentence stands out. Clean and brutal. Do not pay the Trump organization. Pay the receiver. That line changes behavior instantly. Phones light up. Legal departments call emergency meetings. Compliance officers reread the letter twice. No one wants to be the company that ignores a court order. One CFO says it plainly, his voice tight. We can't be the one in contempt. From that moment on, money no longer flows upward to Trump. It flows sideways into the hands of the state's agent. The brand still hangs on the building. The name still gleams on the facade. But the cash has changed direction. Trump, for his part, treats the entire process with open contempt. He mocks it, call it a stunt, dismisses the receiver as a bureaucrat playing dress-up. I've heard this tone before. It's the same scorn he reserves for subpoenas and audits, the same belief that paperwork is weak and willpower is strong. But paperwork is the weapon here. Then, the second blade falls. The judgment default clauses wake up. Most commercial loans contain a trigger few people notice until it's too late. If a borrower suffers a major civil judgment and cannot satisfy it, the loan can be called even if every monthly payment has been made on time. Inside a glass-walled conference room, bankers sit in silence. No jokes. No small talk. Spreadsheets glow on the table. One executive breaks the quiet with a single word: accelerate. That is banker language for paying everything now. This is where the collapse becomes exponential. The state wants equity. The banks want principal. Everyone wants cash. And there isn't enough of it. Properties become battlegrounds. Value evaporates under forced sale pressure. And hovering over all of it is the image no one wants to create but everyone fears. A court-authorized notice. A label. Seized. Placed in the commercial lobby of Trump Tower. Outside, crowds gather. MAGA supporters shout about theft and persecution. Others point to the law and say this is accountability. Cameras roll. Every frame threatens to harden positions. Inside the White House, the fear sharpens. Because if Trump orders interference, if he instructs federal protection to block lawful civil enforcement, the line is crossed. Obstruction. Constitutional crisis. Uncharted territory. I need to say this plainly. Even after decades watching power resist consequence, this is hard to process. I have never seen a moment where a court-appointed manager could dismantle a sitting president's private empire from the inside out without breaking a single door. This is not a spectacle. This is not theater. This is the system doing what it was designed to do when patience runs out. And once the receiver takes the keys, there is no polite way back. This is not the end of a man. It is the end of an order. No verdict today declares a clear winner. That is not how history works in moments like this. What has changed irrevocably is the balance. The direction of force, the assumption that power can always outweigh consequence. The Teflon cracked. For years, Trump treated law as background noise. Filings were mocked. Hearings were belittled. Accusations were waved away as petty distractions beneath a man who measured himself in towers and square footage. I have watched him sneer at judges, ridicule prosecutors, and reduce complex allegations to punchlines. To him, these were small things, annoyances, nothing worth stopping for. But small things accumulate. Now the business empire exists under control, managed, redirected, threatened with liquidation, not by political enemies, but by process, by forms, by signatures, by deadlines that no longer bend. The logic applied to any civil debtor has reached the highest office in the land. That is the historical rupture. A sitting president has been pulled into the mechanics of enforcement as if status no longer changes the math. Rent rerouted. Accounts frozen. Decisions removed from the owner's hands, not as punishment, but as procedure. I need to say this plainly, even after decades of watching power collide with law. I have never seen this alignment, not with this speed, not with this clarity. It is difficult, even for me, to absorb the implications. The fight now moves upward. An emergency request for a stay will land at the Supreme Court. The question will be framed narrowly, but its weight is enormous. Does a sitting president enjoy immunity from civil enforcement, not from judgment enforcement? If the court intervenes, it risks confirming the suspicion that power shields its own. If it refuses, it allows a political leader to be humbled by the same rules governing everyone else. Either path carries consequences. Either path reshapes legitimacy. This is why the atmosphere feels electric. Why does every move feel like a spark near dry grass? We are standing at a point of ignition where law, politics, and markets overlap in territory without a map. Trump, even now, continues to mock the process. He minimizes it, dismiss it, call it trivial. I've seen that reflex before. It is the last defense of a man who believes stature should outweigh statute. But stature does not pay judgments. Liquidity does, and that brings us to the only verdict that matters. Power is not measured by how loudly you dismiss the law. It is measured by whether you recognize the moment when the law stops being a suggestion. Because in the end, history teaches this without mercy. Even giants must learn to walk to the rhythm of a judge's clock. Thank you for staying with me until these final moments. It truly means a great deal. If this story touched you or sparked reflection, please leave a like, hit subscribe, and share so our voices can reach further. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next journey. Farewell.